So just a brief introduction for those of you that are new to Work 180 and you might not be familiar with who we are or what we do. We're on a mission. We're on a mission to empower every woman to choose a workplace where they can thrive. So that's really what drives us at Work 180, which gets us very excited. We're definitely an advocate for working women. We provide job applications with a directory of endorsed employers who support diversity, inclusion and equality. And we share all of that information on our website so women can make really informed decisions about where they next want to work. We have a very stringent screening process that we take all of our employers through to make sure that they're meeting the minimum benchmarks, to ensure that they are an organisation, they are an employer that's really going to help women to thrive when they join their organisation. For those of you that don't know me, I might not be a familiar face. My name is Kate Bushell and I'm the Global Head of Client Engagement for Work 180. And today we're going to be discussing how to support employees who may be experiencing domestic violence. And I'm so lucky to be joined today by two amazing experts in this space, Shaan Ross-Smith, just want to wave your hand, and Anoushka Dowling, who are joining us from an organisation called MATE. And for those of you, again, who aren't familiar with MATE, that stands for Motivating Action Through Empowerment. So the two ladies have a combined corporate experience of over 24 years, so that isn't giving away any birthdays here, but a healthy amount of experiences, which is phenomenal. Working across obviously both the public sector, the private sector, working with both victims and perpetrators of violence and sexual violence assaults. And the duo have been working together for about 3 years now, developing and facilitating the MATE program across both Australia and New Zealand. So they're certainly a complete powerhouse. I've had the fortunate privilege of working with Shaan previously, so I know that you're going to enjoy today and get a lot of insights out of today. Their motto is about meeting people where they're at. So recognizing that when it comes to violence prevention, particularly the prevention of violence against women, that everyone is at a different starting point. And I guess being cognizant of this makes their message accessible and inclusive for all. So Shaan and Anoushka will support you and your people on your journey by doing just that with empathy, education, and evidence. So I'll shortly hand over to Shaan and Anoushka, who are going to run through today's session. But before we start, just a couple of housekeeping guidelines, as we have quite a few people on the call with us today. So can I ask that you please keep your microphone on mute? If you have a question, please feel free to share that in the chat box. And then we'll unmute you at the end of the session to ask that question. So you're welcome to obviously type in questions as we go when something springs to mind. Shaan and Anoushka will be presenting for about 40 minutes today, and then we've got 10 minutes at the end for Q&A, so we've got plenty of time. You're welcome to have your video on, as it's always lovely to see who's with us on the call, and I know as a presenter it's nice to see familiar faces. With that in mind, over to you, Shaan and Anoushka.
Thank you, everyone. We'll just share our screen with you. Thanks, Kate.
That was a lovely intro,
Yeah,
Kate. Thank you. We would love to have you at the beginning of all of our training saying all those nice things about us. That'd be lovely. Can everyone see that screen okay? Yep. Excellent. Okay.
Before we get started, I would like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land that we are each sitting on today. I believe we've got people from everywhere. We would like to pay respects to Aboriginal elders past, present and emerging. Shaan and I are sitting here on Yugambeh country. the land of the Kumberberry saltwater people, we acknowledge their deep spiritual connection to their land. We also believe that if we went back and looked at some of the Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander traditions of kinship and connection, we'd go a long way to joining some of the disconnects that we see in our society today. So I welcome any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander faces or voices onto this call, and welcome to everybody. We had a really great introduction at the start, so we probably don't need to go through this. Yeah. But this is Shaan and I'm Anoushka, and we run the MATE program at Griffith University, and we'll tell you a bit more about the program as we go forward as well.
I guess before we get started, just a little bit about, I guess, why we feel that we can talk about this topic. I spent 16 years working in Queensland Corrective Services, working with people convicted of domestic and sexually violent offences. And I also spent a year working at the Domestic Violence Prevention Centre on the Gold Coast, working in the integrated response manager's position. And I was approached at that time by Griffith University to come and run the program called MATE. And the reason why I jumped at that opportunity is because I really feel like the prevention conversation, or the conversation we're going to have today, is where we can really make some inroads. I'm also the chair of the board at DV Connect. DV Connect is Queensland's largest hotline for women seeking refuge from domestic violence. We also have a men's line and a sexual assault line, and we take on average 120,000 phone calls annually from women in Queensland saying it is too unsafe for me to live in my home. So to me, this is an absolute national crisis. We can't describe it in any other way. But the thing for me that stands out is it's 100% preventable. So together, the thing that I want to really talk about today is how we can all work together to prevent it.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Shaan. Similarly to Shaan, I'm extremely passionate about prevention, about how we can all be part of the solution to issues like violence against women, like racism, all types of discrimination, and how we can all work together to create a really equal and inclusive world. I work with the Domestic Violence Prevention Centre on the Gold Coast also, and I facilitate a behaviour change program for men who have been convicted of domestic violence related offences. So I get to listen to them every week as well, and I get to have conversations with them, uncover what I believe what they tell me their attitudes are, what their beliefs are, and how that has influenced their behaviour, and how as bystanders, which is everyone, we can learn from that and understand what we can each do to contribute to the prevention of violence as we see it, and the long-term cultural change that we need to prevent violence in the future.
I'm just changing our view here. Okay.
Sorry, we're only working on one screen, so when we share our screen, we can't see anything else. But we will work with it.
It's just that we can't see the chat function. So because we can't see the chat function, if anyone has any questions, Kate, can you see the chat function there? Great. So towards the end, if we haven't answered any of your questions, Kate will ask those on your behalf, and we will make sure that we get to everyone. We answer everything that you've asked. So we want to start with, what is domestic violence? This is a really important question, because more often than not, when we go into a room and we ask people what domestic violence is, they will talk about psychological abuse, emotional abuse, economic abuse. And while all of those things are absolutely right, domestic violence is power and control. Domestic violence is when one person has unequal power and control over the other person. So, for instance, the way I put it is, hands up if you live in a perfect relationship. Hands up if you've got the most perfect marriage. And more often than not, people don't put their hand up, right? Because relationships are really hard, and we don't always get it right, and we don't always say the right thing to each other or treat each other with absolute equality. But if you look at the picture on your left, where there's two people that look equal, that might be my husband and I, who don't always get along, who, might sometimes yell at each other or all of those things, but we have equal power and control. So neither one of us feels fearful in the relationship that we can't speak up, we can't have independence, we can't, have equal power and control. In a relationship where there's domestic violence, it's the people on the right-hand side where there's unequal power and control. One person has it, the other person doesn't. And it manifests through those through emotional and psychological, and we're going to go through how they abuse power and control in a moment. But I think it's really important that when we're talking about domestic violence, the easiest way to define it is it's about unequal power and control.
Yeah, further to that, we have a lot of discussions with people about really being able to distinguish when a relationship moves from healthy or healthy, equal, and positive into what might be unhealthy. So that might be that there's toxic communication, that there could even be mutual combat, there could be abuse both ways, but unless there's that unequal power and control, it may not necessarily be domestic violence. So we really want people to be able to distinguish between a healthy, equal relationship, what might be unhealthy, but what might be abusive. And unhealthy doesn't necessarily mean violence or abuse is occurring. So when we really understand that power and control dynamic, that's when we can really start to distinguish between what might be an unhealthy relationship and what might be abusive. We do this because we feel like everybody is trying to understand domestic violence, and when we've started as a society, even as a country, to throw everything into the domestic violence bucket, and that's domestic violence and that's domestic violence, and we have to address that. And when we're doing that, we're striving for a level of perfection we're actually never going to be able to reach, because like Shaan said, relationships are really, really difficult, and we don't always get it right. So unless we are really recognizing that we're dealing with an unequal power and control dynamic, once we recognize that, then we can all contribute to the conversation. Sometimes we find people find it really hard to talk about domestic violence because they're not quite sure what it is and what it isn't. This is a really good way to be able to distinguish that, and we'll give you some, we'll be going through what power and control actually is, what it looks like. So you will hear us gender the conversation. We talk about women being the predominant victims of domestic violence, and we do that for a really, really good reason. The statistics and the research is telling us that we need to be having this conversation before we move on to have subsequent conversations. We know that this disproportionately affects women. We will go through some of those statistics, but the question that we get a lot is, what about men? Why aren't we talking about men? And we really want to make clear that we recognise that men can be victims of domestic violence. We also recognise that women can be violent. It's when we look at things through the power and control lens, you'll start to understand why we gender it and how domestic violence is gendered through that lens. And we also know that, like we said, the statistics that we're going to go through, and that gendering the conversation is really important for us to be able to understand this part of it. I'm not explaining that right, Shaan?
Yeah, just that women have had unequal power throughout society in every aspect of the world, similar to those in other marginalised groups. And so we're not ever coming at it from an equitable playing field. So when it comes to domestic violence in the home, women already have less power than men by virtue of their gender. So that's why it's called gender-based violence, and that's why you see the statistics being so staggering. When 1 woman a week is dying at the hands of her partner, we just don't see the same statistics for men. That's not to say that, like Anoushka said, men can't be victims and women can't be violent, but what we do know is the power and control dynamic often looks different. So when a woman is abusing a man, more often than not, it's not that same dynamic of power and control. So our statistics in Queensland will actually tell us that throughout a period where the Domestic Violence Death Review Advisory Board was examining domestic violence, of the 294 cases where of domestic violence homicide, 20 of those homicides had been committed by women. And actually when you look at, 20 of the 294 were committed by women. When you dig a little bit deeper than that, what you'll find is in all 20 of those cases, those women were victims and the man was the predominant aggressor. So we're not saying that it's okay that those women murdered those men, but it's important to understand context, that actually those women had lived with abuse for many, many, many years. and it eventuated in the homicide of that man. So statistics can also be really important in this space to really understand them. Wherever we go, wherever we go, people will always say, well, what about men? And oftentimes those statistics can be misunderstood. So it's a really important thing to highlight right at the beginning.
And we are by no means saying that all men are violent.
No.
When we talk about men, we're talking about men who use violence. And we are both happily married to men, and we both also have sons. This is not about hating on men. It's about what we can all do to be part of the solution. We all contribute to the culture and to the culture that supports violence, and when we start to understand that, we can start to recognise how we can contribute to the cultural change to prevent it, regardless of our gender. So here's some of the statistics that we were talking about. Like Shaan said, at least one woman a week is dying at the hands of her partner or former partner in Australia. Almost 10 women a day are hospitalised for assault injuries perpetrated by a domestic partner. Intimate partner violence is the third greatest health risk factor for women aged 25 to 44, with the first being childhood abuse and neglect. And in 2015, an analysis of violence against women in Australia found that it is costing the economy $21.7 billion each year. And domestic and family violence is the leading driver of homelessness for women. So like we said, this is disproportionately affecting women, and we have to focus here. And when we can focus here and address the power and control dynamic, we'll actually be able to go on and address a number of other issues that we see in our society that are that's impacting our health and safety. So this is what we know. Violence against women is what we know. And there may be other people out there talking about different types of violence or violence against men, and that's great. However, this is what we're going to be talking about today, and I hope that is okay with everyone.
So what are the signs of domestic violence? We're going to really, I know this was one of the questions from someone who's out there listening today, and it's really important that we pick up on these signs. So we're going to roll through them. We don't have much time, so we're going to get into them quite quickly. But what I want everyone on this call to do is download the Duluth Power and Control Wheel. This is a free wheel that everyone can download. It has a corresponding equality wheel. And for every HR manager out there, this is going to be your absolute best resource that you have to identify and respond to domestic violence. When I'm working with people who case manage, so when I'm working with case managers of probation or parole or child safety or youth justice, I say, print out this wheel and highlight the bits that correspond to what you're seeing, what you're hearing, because this will really help you to identify and respond. So this wheel is from the 80s, and it was put together by a number of victims of domestic violence who were trying to really describe to police what it was like to live with domestic violence, because we were so conditioned to thinking that the physical abuse was what we needed to respond to. And so this is the wheel that they came up with, and you can tell that it's missing things like technology, because back then that wasn't such a big thing, but this is still the best resource that we have to work with and identify this. So interestingly for me, when I worked with victims of domestic violence and I would show them this wheel, they would say, have you been following me? Like, this is my life. How did I not know this? How has no one shown me this wheel? I've been to doctors, I've been to lawyers, I've been everywhere, and no one has shown me this. And at the time I was astounded, but Anoushka and I started working with the Alison Baden Clay Foundation, and we sat with Jeff and Priscilla, Alison's parents, to talk about writing a program with them. And we sat down at their kitchen table and we showed them this wheel, didn't we, Noosh? And they went through how many years of legal?
7 years in the criminal justice system.
And not one person had shown them this wheel. So every time the legal system asked Jeff and Priscilla, was Alison experiencing domestic violence? They kept saying, no, we never saw the bruises, we never saw the physical abuse. Actually, when we sat down with them and showed them this wheel, they could give us at least one example of absolutely everything that was happening to her around this wheel. So I cannot stress enough the importance of this. And if you're friends with Anoushka and I, you've received this via text message, via messenger, on your fridge, you name it. And it's something that we will continually put out there. because it's really important. Not only that, but for parents with children that are getting into the dating scene, to be able to recognize it beforehand, to know what it looks like. This is really, really important document.
As bystanders, especially as humans, however we interact with other people in our lives, this gives us the language for what non-physical signs of violence look like. We often notice these things, but we don't have the language to put to it, and we don't have it set out like this where we can see that it may be part of a pattern. And that's the really important thing that this will allows us to do.
Yeah, so let's get into it. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to walk you through a really stereotypical example of what this might look like. Now, this isn't to say that this is what happens with everyone, but in our experience, this is kind of how it works. So people often say, well, how did that woman get herself into that relationship? And we'll say she got herself into that relationship the same way you got into yours. You know, she fell in love, they fell in love, and everything started out to be beautiful and equal and lovely. But for someone who needs to use parent control, so for someone who is in that relationship thinking they need to use parent control, more often than not, they'll start with insidious types of parent control like isolation. So, you know, Shaan, you're the love of my life. I think you're amazing. We want to be together forever. You know, I just can't believe how lucky I am to have met you. But I don't want you going out with your friends on the weekend, babe. You know, I'm a guy and I know what guys are like. They'll be hitting on you and you're my girl. So why don't we just stay home together? And that might sound like love to me. That might sound like that's a really nice thing to say. And yes, we want to stay home. But actually, jealousy equals possessiveness. So it equals that person thinking that they own you, you're their possession, and they get to dictate when you do and don't go out. So you'll see in song lyrics, in movies, jealousy is a central theme, and we've kind of mixed it up with love. And actually there's no love in jealousy, right? So jealousy is extremely concerning. I don't think your mum needs a key to our house. We're adults now and she should let us know when she's coming over. Work drinks always end in disaster. I say we just don't go to work drinks anymore. I love you, but I don't like that you're religious. Do you really need to go to church anymore? Babe, I think we should move away from everyone and just get a fresh start. This can sound really insidious. It can sound like at the start of a new relationship, but actually if that person is going to abuse parent control, isolation is a great way to start. It's a great place for that person to start, because isolating me from the people that are closest to me and the people that might call out some behavior, and making sure that I become quite dependent and reliant on him, is exactly what he would like to see happen. So as bystanders, as employers, this is some of the stuff you might just see. Oh no, we just hang out with each other now. We don't really see many other people. No, I don't really see my mum as often. Michael doesn't really like her. Those are some of the themes that you might start to hear.
Yeah.
Anything else?
No, that's all good. So the next thing may be
I don't know why it's now not working.
Using emotional abuse once we get there. What's going on? We've lost her. We lost her cursor. Okay, so using emotional abuse. So once that person is isolated, it could move into something like using emotional abuse. So putting her down, making her feel bad about herself, calling her names, making her think she's crazy, playing mind games, humiliating her, and making her feel guilty. So it might sound like you used to take really good care of yourself, but now you don't really care what you look like. You're a little bit dumb. Like, I don't understand why you don't get that. I explain it to you and you just don't get it. Are you sure you don't have mental health issues? Like, I think there's something wrong with you. Can you believe how stupid Shaan is? Like, she doesn't even know how to do a budget. The thing with emotional abuse, I call it the shifting of the goalposts. It doesn't matter what you do, the goalposts will shift. And we know that these relationships start off like any other relationship, like Shaan said. There's happiness, there's love. So you as the person who's experiencing this violence is going to do whatever you can to get back there, but those goalposts keep shifting. So when I'm talking to the men on the program and I ask them the types of names, if they're name calling, what do they say? What are the words that they use? What are the names that they use? And we'll make a list of them. And they'll be derogatory, they'll be horrible. A lot of them will also be based on the woman's physical appearance, so their partner's physical appearance. And when I ask them why they choose to use those words, why they choose those things, they know that one thing is going to be the thing that's going to bring her down. It's going to close down the argument. It's going to mean that he wins. It's going to upset her, or it's going to set her off, or whatever they say. They know that that's the one thing. So they have absolute control over where those goalposts go, and they can shift them anytime. If he calls her fat and she loses weight, it'll be something else. If he calls her ugly and she gets dressed up and puts her makeup on, it'll then be something else. Those goalposts will continue to shift and move.
Yeah, and it's important to note that in the early days, do you remember in the early days of your relationship where you'd sit on the probably not the trampoline, but you'd sit somewhere till 2 or 3 in the morning and talk about life. And it's in those moments that you share things about yourself, like I've never really liked my thighs, or I've always had a hang up about my nose, or my mum used to call me a name, that whatever it is, you share those details when you're getting to know someone. So he will bank those things, and those are the things that will come back out. So, your mum was right. You are stupid, or, you're right, your thighs, like they're huge now. Your nose, it is crooked. It's those things that mean that my self-worth feels like this. If my self-worth is minimal, then I'm not going to go out on a Saturday night, right? I'm not going to go out with my friends. I'm going to stay home with him. I'm going to feel lucky that I've got him, because no one else would want me, because he's right. I am those things. So I become more reliant on him. I become a little bit withdrawn from my friends. I become withdrawn at work. And I really start to believe or buy into some of that stuff about myself. Don't forget, we as women have been socially conditioned over many, many years to measure our worth based on our physical appearance. So it's the first thing that, when you walk into a gym, people say, Shaan, you've lost weight. Like it's a compliment, like it means more to me for someone to say that than to say you're a good human. So it's really important that we understand then where gender comes into it, because that physical appearance is something that we're measured on throughout society. So that's really how that emotional abuse works. Minimizing, denying, and blaming. So I didn't do that, Susan. You're a bit crazy, aren't you? You make stuff up. You say that I did it. That is not how it happened. You are the psycho. You're the one that does this. You start everything, and then you don't like what I say, but you started it. You know how to push my buttons. You know how to set me up. You do it all the time. You ask any of my friends, I'm not the psycho, but there's a fair few people that think you are. And where's your mum now? You haven't seen her for weeks. Where's Anoushka? She doesn't come over anymore. That's because everyone thinks that of you. So that's really where this self-worth becomes absolutely non-existent. That just didn't happen, plain and simple. You make stuff up. You say it happened when it didn't. You know how to push my buttons. You cause it, and then you blame me. So I can tell you 100% of the women that would come into the domestic violence service would say, I cause it. I'm to blame because I caused the violence, or I caused those things. And so there's so much work then that needs to be done to undo that and say his violence, his abuse is never your fault. You never caused it. Nush, do you want to talk about the pushing of the buttons?
Yeah, we oftentimes, that's the minimizing, denying, and blaming is so inherent in people who use violence, because they've never been able to take accountability for the hurt or the abuse that they've caused. So the men on the program will always say, she pushes my buttons. She knows how to set me off. And I'll always say, she doesn't have your buttons. The only person in control of your buttons is you. So trying to get them to understand accountability is the hugest part. This is commonly referred to as gaslighting. So making her believe that something that's happening isn't actually happening, or something is not happening the way that she believes that it is happening. And this is combined with the isolation, combined with the emotional abuse, or even on its own. This is the slow wearing down of a woman's social, psychological, and emotional resources that then makes her completely reliant on him, and makes her question everything she thinks that she knows about herself.
Yeah, and we're going to talk about in the workplace what you might recognise, but a really important one here is you might recognise one of your colleagues start to question everything she does. No, that report's really not good enough. No, it's probably the manager's probably not going to like that. It's that sort of stuff that will come out in the workplace. So, you will. If they've always been confident, it might be that kind of slow wearing down of confidence. You might notice a change in their physical appearance. So they used to wear. I know a friend of mine who was going through it, and her partner would not allow her to wear anything that was revealing and anything that any makeup at all, and it was really noticeable. So she would come to gatherings and be wearing like a massive big outfit, and no, her hair wasn't done and her makeup wasn't done and that was a change for her. So the change is the important thing. It's your gut feeling usually that will tell you, hang on, something's not right here, something's changed. And as employers, as colleagues, this is where we really want everyone's radar to be up, because more often than not, we see these things, we're not tracking them, and before we know it, things have gotten really bad. Yeah, so let's keep going. I say that once he has economic control, he has full control over that woman. Economic independence is the most important part of this, because if a woman wants to leave this relationship and he has economic control, she can't leave. But think about this. If I had to come to you every day and ask you for money to buy my lunch, or for money to go and buy a bit of shopping, or for, can I please go and get a new deodorant today? If I asked you every time, can you think about what that would do for my worth, for my feelings of independence, but for my self-worth, that I have to ask for that? So more often than not, it might be that he prevents her from getting a job or keeping a job, or he forces her to go to work, but then keeps all of the money. And it could be under the guise of, I'm better with managing the money. You're going to spend it on useless things, so I'll set the budget. But if he sets the budget and the budget is, $15 a week, then that doesn't get you very far, right? So anything over and above that, she has to ask for it. You can think about just that self-worth going. So I should do a budget for the both of us to start saving money, and we'll just have an allowance each week. You don't need to work. I need you at home with the children, and I'll earn the money for us. That to the next door neighbor might sound nice, right? But if that's not her choice, and that's not a mutual decision, then that's abusive, right?
And if that takes any power away from her to make her own choices.
That's right. You don't really need more than $20 per week for coffees and stuff like that. I'll just give you $20 per week. And if you need more, just ask me. And we've had so many men on the program, say, she can just ask me for money, but think about that asking bit. Think about that bit, right? Because that's
who holds all the power in that.
Who's got the power, and who gets to decide yes or no, and who gets to decide how quickly they give the money or don't give the money. I'll need to access your bank account so that I can do the budget, and you spend money on crap for the kids, and we don't need any more of that. You'll need to ask me if you want to spend money on non-essential things. Now, don't forget, if you have equal power and control in a relationship, it might be quite normal for one of you to do the banking and the budgeting. But if there's unequal power, this is where this is really concerning. So it's really important that as bystanders, as employers, we have these conversations. We recognize the importance of financial independence. Anoushka and I, in the last 3 or 4 months, have done a lot of training with some big corporates. And we've had quite a lot of women approach us and say, I earn in excess of $100,000 a year. I do not see a cent of that. I have to give every bit of it over to him. He's accessed early super due to COVID, and my early super due to COVID, and has said that, we need it, but I didn't want to do it. It wasn't my decision. He's forced me to take out job seeker, job keeper. He's forced me to, this is really, for me, I say, if a woman, this is where her independence is completely taken from her.
And this really highlights the importance of the work that Work 180 does by closing the economic disparities for women, because, like we said, the power and control is already completely uneven through the gender pay gap, through other economic discrimination of women, and it already puts us on an unequal playing field. So parental leave, lack of super, all of those things contributes to this and gives the power to one gender, and we have to recognise societally how society plays into this.
Why does it do that?
I don't know, it just changes its mind.
Using children, do you want to talk to that?
Yeah, so making her feel guilty about the children, using the children to relay messages, using visitation to harass her, threatening to take the children away. I know for anybody who's listening today, we will do anything for our children, and for women who are experiencing violence with children in the home, it's the number one reason why they don't reach out for support. He may say things like, if you ever leave me, I'll take the children, you'll never see them again. Send messages through the children, which is child abuse as well. I'll contact child safety and tell them about the time you fed the children baked beans for a whole week. You and I know that child safety that's not going to hit child safety's radar. Remembering though that this woman may also be experiencing the other parts of the will we've already spoken about. She's going to start to believe that he does have the power to do that. He does have the power to take her children away. You don't even work. The family court will never give you custody of the kids. If you leave me, you will never get custody of the kids. Also, you're psycho, you've got mental health issues. They'll never give you custody of the children.
And I've got all the money, so good luck in court. You've got no money to defend yourself.
Where are you going to go? What are you going to do? Where are you going to live? There's nowhere for you to go. We speak to many women who even after the relationship has ended, the children are used to continue that abuse against her, continue to use through visitation, relaying messages through social media, a myriad of ways that we could talk about forever.
Can I just go back to economic abuse for a minute? Because there was a question that was asked that I can answer right here, and that is the impact during COVID. I cannot tell you the amount of women phoning DV services saying, I cannot report him to the police because if he loses his job right now, we will be on the street. So I cannot afford to report him to police, for him to be charged. He'll lose his job, his employer will sack him, and then we're out. We'll be evicted. So think about that. That then becomes that woman's problem. It then becomes hers to hide as well, because the cost of that means that, is particularly if he has the money, particularly if he's withholding money from her, then she absolutely feels like that is not an option. So a lot of times people will say, a woman would call police, or a woman would do this, or a woman would do that. There's so many reasons why that's not an option for women. Sorry, I just remembered that, Noosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There you go.
No, using coercion and threats. If you ever leave me, I will top myself. I will suicide. This will all be on you. I'll write a letter so that everyone knows that you drove me to this, Shaan. If you ever leave me, I'll come after you and I will kill you. I will kill the children. No one will ever see you again. So you just try and leave me. If you ever try and leave me or cheat on me, I'll report you to welfare for claiming Centrelink that you weren't meant to claim. You will claim Centrelink and say that we aren't together if you want me to stay with you. If you don't phone police and tell them that you made up the whole thing, then it will be all your fault. I'll be in prison. You'll have to explain to the children that you put me here. So this coercion and threats is something that is held over that woman psychologically, and it's to the point where for a lot of women that I worked with, coercion and threats was his main ammo. It's the main thing that he used, because he could then, once he's made that threat, he can then use a look or an action or a gesture that reinforces that and doesn't even need to use the words. So for a lot of women that I work with in the women's prisons, they've been coerced into fraudulent, like stealing money from their employer, different things like that, that if they didn't, there was a threat of him suiciding, of him killing the children, killing her, all of those things. I know where your family lives. I know where everyone lives. You won't be able to hide anywhere. So using coercion and threats is when that woman's already worn down to nothing. She doesn't have those emotional resources. She doesn't have the economic power. She doesn't have the family and friends around her. She's quite isolated. you can only imagine what that coercion and threats messaging will do.
Yeah. We'll move on to the next one. So using intimidation. So these actually go really hand in glove together, the coercion and threats and the using intimidation. Like Shaan said, it can, if there's ever been any incidents of an explosion of violence, whether it's physical violence or some other escalation of violence, that the threat of that, again, can be used to intimidate her forevermore without him ever needing to use physical violence again, for example. So don't you push me, and there's that hidden or else. Don't you dare, or else I will. I wasn't trying to get you. I just threw it at the wall behind your head. And I hear that time and time again from the men on the program. I didn't hit her. I threw it at the wall behind her head, or I smashed it on the ground in front of her. They completely believe that that's not intimidating, or that isn't violent or abusive in any way. You pushed me too far this time. You just wait.
You just wait. Think about that. Wait till when? Wait till how? Who has the power? When is that going to happen?
What's
that going to look like?
Yeah. What does setting him off look like? Even the dog doesn't listen to me in this house. He will pay too. Abusing pets is a huge thing. I know it probably sounds like it's an exaggeration, but it absolutely isn't. It's way more common in people who use abuse than we would like to think. So using male privilege, again, this is what we've spoken about the societal impact and how we as a society are socially conditioned to give men the power in the relationship and in the world, right? So making all the big decisions, treating her like a servant, acting like the master of the castle, being the one to define men's and women's roles, and the rigid gender stereotypes are the main driver of violence against women because of that unequal balance of power and control. So it may sound like your role is to look after the children. That's all I ask. You keep the children quiet. I've had a huge day. I've decided that we'll move at the end of the lease. I don't want any advice about it from you. I'm going for a drink with the boys Friday night. I don't know when I'll be home. So the roles that we are pushed into based on our gender are the main driver of violence against women because of that unequal power and control. And that's what we really ultimately need to start to shift in our society. Again, it's the driver of the gender pay gap, and all of the other things that we see that create the economic inequality across society. Yeah.
So if you want to prevent violence against women, then you're not currently a customer or a client of Work 180. Work 180 is preventing violence against women, right? So we often don't make the link between gender inequality and violence against women. But like Anoushka said, this is the main driver. So if we can ensure that women feel safe and equal in a workplace, then that will have a flow-on effect to women feeling safer in society, women having more equality or equity and equality in society, and that will lead to a decrease in domestic violence. So for me, it's really important that, because employers often say, well, what can I do? You can start there. You can ensure that your workplace has gender equality all the way through at every level within the organisation. We can talk to that in a little while. So around the outside of that wheel, you'll see physical and sexual. And physical and sexual physical is obvious when someone is abusing power and control in a physical way. You'll often see that. You'll see the physical abuse. But sexual is around the outside, because if he is saying, Shaan, you're fat, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're lazy, you don't even know, and don't you dare, and if you ever, and then at 9 o'clock that night, he says, how about it, Shaan? Do you think I have the ability to say, I'm just not in the mood tonight? And actually, we know that less than 1% of rape within a marriage or relationship is taken to the point of conviction and prosecution. Yet if a woman doesn't have any power and control in that relationship, she cannot consent or withdraw her consent for sex. And yet we separate the two things out all the time. But I'm here to tell you today that they're absolutely linked, and we need to talk about them together.
And also, and I've never really made this link in my mind until now, if all of the things inside of the wheel are happening, or even one or two of the things inside of the wheel are happening, physical abuse may never occur. It may never actually be prevalent or ever actually occur.
He may not need to use it.
He may not need to use it because he can get power and control by using one or any of the things inside of that will. Sexual abuse, however, is likely more often than not occurring if any of those things are happening in the will. So that's a real difference between the physical and sexual abuse.
Yeah, absolutely is. And that's important to note though, Anoushka, because a lot of people say, I would intervene if things got bad. And we say, what do you mean by bad? And they'll say, well, if there was anything physical. And like Anoushka just said, one or two things of that will can be at play for that woman. And that is absolutely soul destroying. That's really high level abuse. It may not be physical. And so we know in the case of Alison Baden-Clay, we also know in the case of Hannah Baxter, both Queensland cases, that there wasn't physical violence that was known to the family or friends or loved ones. So, but there was absolutely everything in that wheel happening. So and it
ended in murder.
Yeah. So this is why it's really important that we get to know those things inside that wheel. Okay, so we're really mindful of time. As a work colleague, what you might see someone leaving work right on time or be watching the clock because their partner could be waiting for them. They could expect them home at a certain time. If they're 5 minutes late, who have they been talking to? What have they been doing? They might arrive at work early and eat their breakfast or stay later. A lot of women will describe that work is her safest place. So she'll take her food there. That's her place to get away. Takes numerous calls from her partner at work. So her partner absolutely is checking in on her throughout the day. And if she walks down to meet him after work and she walks down with Michael, who the hell is Michael? What does he do? Where does he work? Is he on the same floor as you? So she can get 150 questions about the male colleagues in her life. She may have to meet her partner for lunch before or after work. She might have stopped coming to after work drinks or contributing to the farewell flowers because of economic abuse and because of isolation. She could be concerned about losing her job because the pressure from him could be overwhelming. She may be unable to cope with the workload pressure because think of that pressure on top of the pressure she's receiving from him. She may cover her arms, legs, neck and face. She may seem withdrawn, concerned or frightened. She may seem quite defensive of her partner, and I've described the reasons why. She may appear secretive about her home life and doesn't never want you to call into her home, and may be resistant to you visiting her house. Oh. It's when it's moved or something, I think.
So if there is a perpetrator in your workplace or somebody using violence, you may see that they leave work right on time or be watching the clock. They make numerous phone calls to their partner, meet their partner for lunch before or after work, talk about their partner in derogatory ways. So really being mindful of that male privilege and how that plays out in his attitudes towards women.
She's got mental health issues. Yeah. She's lazy. She's, those types of things.
Yeah. You'll be able to hear in conversation how much she contributes, how he makes all the decisions, that level of respect for her contribution or her opinion. That'll come out in everyday conversation. You may hear them complain about their partner, make degrading comments about women in general, make reference to not seeing many people on the weekends, refer to their role in the home or relationship as being a decision maker or being the master of the castle, and they may have joint social media accounts or shared Apple IDs, which we'll probably talk about. Problematic. So during COVID in particular, the things that you may see, hear or sense, friends, students or work colleagues appearing differently when you're all together in person. We're all going through different levels of stress and anxiety and adapting to change. So there's some normality in that, but when, like Shaan said, your gut feeling and your intuition is what's going to give you an idea about whether or not you should be checking in. They appear concerned about working from home or overly, there's complexities for them working at home, and those are coming out for them. They appear stressed, concerned, upset or sad, reluctant to do video-based web calls or won't turn on their video when you do call them. The partner's always in the background of the call, or you can see that her body language is different because he is there. Maybe unable to cope with the workload pressure, and that feels like it's disproportionate to the amount of pressure that there actually is. Again, covering legs, arms, necks or face. Seeming withdrawn, concerned or frightened, defensive of the partner, appearing secretive about their home life. So even if you're asking how things are, it's hard to get a straight answer.
So as an effective bystander, what can you do? The first thing is to listen, be non-judgmental, and don't give advice. So no one likes to hear, if I were you, I would leave him. It's probably the worst advice that you can give. Do not say, I would do this, or I wouldn't put up with that. Share information with all your colleagues about the DV services, and we'll talk about those in a moment. Check your organisation's DV policy so that you can support your colleague with the information contained in it. So as a bystander, do your own homework. So you can say, did you know that you can take some leave if you need to take leave? You know, you've got access to this. Do you want me to help you fill out the paperwork, or what do you need from me? Ensure no one in your organisation is engaging in victim blaming conversations. I can't tell you the amount of women who will say, my employer's got all these wonderful DV policies, but if you're ever sitting in the lunchroom, you hear women and men saying things like, well, it can't be that bad if Shaan's still there, or it can't be that bad, you know, with that Hannah Clark murder, you know, maybe she did this or maybe she did that. So they'll hear that victim blaming language, and that will tell them that their workplace is not a safe place to actually disclose and to come forward. And so it's the conversations in the lunchroom, to me, that make all the difference. Understand the driver of violence against women being gender inequality, and drive gender equality within your workplace. And your support mustn't have an expiry date or conditions attached to it. What are some of the good questions that you can ask someone experiencing it? How are you? What's getting you through? What's getting you through COVID at the moment? How's the technology working for you from home? I'm finding it really hard to juggle working from home. How are you finding it? What can you do to relieve stress at this time? How have you mapped out your tasks for the day? Who do you lean on for support during this time, during COVID? Who would you usually lean on for support that you can't right now? You know, and these questions, if you think about the power control wheel, they all link back to that wheel. So more often than not, people are saying, but what domestic violence questions do I ask? These are your domestic violence questions. Domestic violence questions are never, are you experiencing domestic violence, right? They're these questions, because it's always up to that victim whether they want to disclose to you. You never take power from them, because they've already had their power taken. So these are questions that enable that person to know that you're a safe place, that you're open to the conversation, and they can disclose what they want to. What are you most looking forward to when things return to normal? And can I set a task today where everyone reads through all of our wellbeing, risk, safety, HR policies and reports back on them? And that way you're getting everyone in the group to read your DV policy.
And what those questions do too is allows you as a bystander to assess or address what they're saying back to you, and then determine about whether you're going to ask further questions based on that wheel. So like Shaan said, they're not, are you experiencing violence and what can we do, and do you need this number? Not necessarily that until you've gotten further down the conversation. What those questions do is show yourself as somebody who's there to offer the support. If you feel like a safe place for them, they may continue to disclose the more questions that you ask. But this is about you addressing or assessing how much might be happening on that power and control wheel, whether they're in that unhealthy space or whether they're in the abusive space or whether they're right back at healthy. It's just allowing you to kind of get more information and show yourself as somebody who's there to offer support.
And one of the questions that someone sent through was, what if you ask, what if you're asking these questions and there isn't domestic violence? Well, that's, Anoushka and I ask questions of each other all the time. Like, why can't you say that to Lincoln? What would he say if you did say that? Those are, they're questions that you would ask each other anyway. So like I say, they're not domestic violence questions per se. They're just questions about people's lives. They're being interested in their life.
There are also questions that if a perpetrator is around, listening to the video call, then it's not going to sound like you are onto them or that you're asking anything explicit. So as a workplace bystander, what we really want people to do is to send out regular emails. This was particularly important during COVID when everybody's working from home, about support services. Video conferencing is the best way to stay connected, again, when we're not in the office. Don't type any DV specific questions to colleagues. Try to make it so that you set a rule that cameras are on unless there's a reason that they can't be. And always try to schedule one-on-one connections, so that if there is a reason that some people don't want to turn on cameras and colleagues being able to see everything, seeing if that changes, if it's one-on-one and why that may be. If you can guarantee job security, please do it. If not, list and communicate exactly what staff are entitled to with instructions on how they can access it. Even at Griffith, there's so much instability around jobs, across different schools and categories of the university, and most people are saying there's not enough communication about it, and people are feeling really insecure. So the more security that we can give, and the better the communication and the more consistent the communication, the better. For larger organisations, do the legwork. We've worked with a couple of organisations that have said we're going to have to stand people down, but here's an organisation that are hiring, and we've created a connection, which just makes it so much easier. Mental health support is often an easier avenue to get the DV specific support services to people. Rather than domestic violence specific support services being sent out, getting people to really connect in with mental health support, whether that's EAP, especially if they're domestic violence trained, it's even better. Meditation apps. We also suggest sending gift boxes with services, support service flyers and information in them as well, which again is just a covert way of being able to do that safely.
We're going to give you these slides too, so if there's we'll send all these slides out to everyone. Share what your workplace is doing in relation to domestic violence more broadly at this time. It's a good reminder to all staff about how invested you are. Send weekly emails to say, here's what we're doing in the domestic violence space. Send out company-wide emails about domestic violence and what supports you have available. Review your DV policy and ensure that you have provisions for staff to take leave during the pandemic and into the future. As per above, future-proof now. What took you by surprise during COVID? What took you by surprise in terms of your domestic violence policies? What could you do better? What are the ways you can remain socially connected to your workforce? We've seen a lot of organisations do things like online concerts, charity involvement. It's really important for women experiencing violence that they feel connected to their workplace at this time, because prior to COVID, it was their one safe place to be. I saw one of the questions about can you force a woman to work from or can you ask her to work from the office if you know that home is not a safe place? Again, open that up to everyone. If you feel like working from home isn't the best option for you right now, you're welcome to come and work from. So you open it up to everyone. You don't just ask that person individually, and that way that person doesn't feel conflicted around that. But she can then say, "Yep, I'd like to be that. I'd like to be one of those people that comes back to work early and works from the workplace." Workplaces should address domestic violence as a safety concern. So we do fire training. We do fire training annually. We do first aid. Why don't we do domestic violence training annually? It needs to be on our annual business plan. Review your policy alongside your business continuity planning. That's your questions there. I know we're fast running out of time. Considerations where couples live together and there's domestic violence concerns. Again, what we try to do is ensure, what we try and do is ensure that we don't take any more power than what's already been taken, but we understand that there may be complexities around losing income and what that would mean. Oftentimes there's quite a bit of debt that's racked up, and so losing employment can be really concerning. Again, if you're sending out company-wide domestic violence emails to everyone saying, here's our company expectations, here's our policies, constantly communicating that, then you will get those messages out there.
regardless of whether the victim and the perpetrator work for the same organisation as well. The beautiful thing about the bystander approach is if we're sending things out to our organisation about what we can do, if we know of people using or experiencing violence, then we're also capturing the people who are using or experiencing violence in that communication as well. So we don't necessarily have to be really explicit about if you are a victim of violence. We can instead change the approach to be talking about if you know somebody who is experiencing violence, here's the things that we can do, which captures everyone in that conversation and can be less confronting for people as well.
I'm just going to keep going, but we will absolutely answer everyone's questions. The best places right now to refer people to is 1800-RESPECT. DV Connect and Queensland Government have a really great site for, I would say, for employers to go onto and have a look. 1800-RESPECT and DV Connect are both 24/7 hotlines. And I know if you're phoning in from different states, you would have your statewide service. But 1800-RESPECT is a national service. That's where I'd be referring.
And whatever state, Vic Health, if you're in Victoria, wherever you are, the government websites have a lot of information and COVID-specific information, but also non-COVID specific.
So here at MATE, we actually deliver Alison's Gift, which is the Alison Baden-Clay training, which is specific to what bystanders can do, and it rolls through Alison Baden-Clay's story and looks at ways that she was a victim of domestic violence and what her family wished that they had of known and what to do in those moments. We also run a program called MATE, which is a program that's based on the leadership and the bystander, but also gender inequality and how that directly links to violence against women. So do you want to explore that?
Yeah, so what we can do, we look at what lies beneath gender-based violence. So what are the drivers of of domestic violence, sexual harassment, sexual assault? And like we said, that's gender inequality, but how that is manifested in society. So we look at sexist jokes and language, the objectification of women, the gender pay gap, all of the things that sit beneath the surface that contribute to a culture of violence that we can all address. So it's about what we can do to create safer workplaces, homes, schools, communities. We sit in the training as humans, as bystanders, but we also encourage organisations and people within those organisations to look at the culture within that organisation and how we can contribute to gender equality and therefore eliminate gender-based violence. We also, so we run a train the trainer in that as well, so people can then roll out MATE cultural change workshops within their own organisation. And we have an online version of the program, and we also have respectful workplace relationships, or creating respectful workplaces, which is applying the bystander approach to positive workplace culture.
That was really quick. That's our website. Please go to our website if you want more information about what we do, who we are, and where you can get some training. And we also are on social media as well. Just want to thank Work 180 for having us. We're probably their biggest fans, but we recognise as well that today's been really challenging for people. So if you want to reach out for support, we are here, and we'll take your phone calls anytime, but also to reach out to 1800-RESPECT if you need some support. This can be really challenging and confronting conversation. We really recognise that. But we think if we all work together that we can absolutely change the world. So this is our favourite quote. I always wondered why somebody doesn't do something about that, and then I realised that I was somebody. And that's what we're all doing here today. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you, Shaan. Thank you, Anoushka. I'm sure I speak on behalf of everyone when I just say that was so insightful and informative, and it's such a sensitive topic that you talk on with ease and for us all to connect with. So just a couple of things very, very quickly, just in the interest of time. Already gone over and out. I'm sure people have to run off to their other meetings, but we'll share everything with you that the ladies have been through today. MATE is a fantastic program, so I would highly recommend that you reach out to either Anoushka or Shaan via LinkedIn or via MATE if you put that into Google search engine. And as trailblazers for your organisation, being part of this today is really just shaping what you're able to do for your staff, for your employers, for your friends within the DV space, which I know has just been heightened for a lot of us during COVID. So thank you all for joining us today. If we didn't get to answer your question, then I'll take that offline with the ladies and we'll try and get a response back to you in the communication that we send as part of this follow-up. So thank you, and hope everyone has a wonderful rest of the day.